Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington DC. I'm Nick Harper and these are the headlines. At least 31 people killed in a crackdown by Iranian security forces as protests erupt after the death of a woman in custody of morality police, claims Oslo-based Iran human rights NGO. Hamas threatens repercussions over Jewish visits to Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, days before the start of the Jewish holidays when visitor numbers increase. The Bank of England hikes its interest rate to combat soaring inflation, as it warns that the UK's economy has already slipped into recession. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake strikes western Mexico early on Thursday, leaving a woman dead after she fell and hit her head, as residents evacuate their homes during the country's second major quake this week. Taiwan will fully reopen its borders by ending mandatory COVID quarantine for arrivals starting from next month. And it's official, Roger Federer will partner with his greatest rival, Rafael Nadal, in his final match. The duo will take on Team World's Jack Sock and Francis Tiafoe in the Lava Cup doubles match on Friday.
Hovers at a 20-year high as the Federal Reserve announced a third consecutive interest rate hikes, signaling that borrowing will remain expensive for some time.
There's a very high likelihood that we'll have a period of below trend growth, by which I mean much lower growth, and we're seeing that now.
Well, in its fight to rein in soaring prices in the world's largest economy, the US central bank has hiked interest rates by 75 basis points for the third consecutive time. The increase takes target policy rates to the range of 3 to 3.25%. The Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, says that the rate rises were necessary to avoid long-term damage to the economy.
Today, the FOMC raised its policy interest rate by 0.75 of a percentage point, and we anticipate that ongoing increases will be appropriate. We are moving our policy stance purposefully to a level that will be sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2%.
Powell further signalled that there will be additional large increases in the future to combat inflation that remains near a 40-year high.
So there was a big imbalance between supply and demand. Housing prices were going up at an unsustainably fast level. So the deceleration in housing prices that we're seeing should help bring sort of prices more closely in line with rents and other housing market fundamentals. And, you know, that's a good thing. For the longer term, what we need is supply and demand to get better aligned so that housing prices go up at a reasonable level, at a reasonable pace, and that people can afford houses again. And I think we probably in the housing market have to go through a correction to get back to that place.
Well, for more on this, our US correspondent Susan Tarani joins us live from New York City. Susan, what did the Fed have to say about this latest interest rate rise?
Yeah, Nick, it's interesting that it seems like it shows that the Fed knows that unemployment will be on the rise, but it's determined to increase interest rates and to bring down inflation at whatever cost. And I think so much for that soft landing that they were talking about earlier in the year. I think these are pretty aggressive moves, and the Fed has acknowledged that. I think it's saying by the sound bites that you just played right now, it's indicating that it is going to continue and to buckle up until the inflation comes down at whatever cost. And altogether, I think it also signals that this pessimistic outlook that is paired with this interest rate that we're seeing right now, it's ultimately going to have a broader toll on the entire economy moving forward as we enter the next quarter.
And Susan, how have US markets reacted to the news of this latest rate hike?
Sorry, I lost you there.
Susan, I was just asking, how did US markets react to this latest rate hike?
Yeah, the markets were very jumpy. I mean, we did hear that the dollar was hovering at a 20-year high yesterday, and it's expected to remain pretty strong compared to the euro in the short term. Analysts aren't making any predictions in the long term. But then I just want to note that, while we do have a strong dollar right now compared to the euro, the pound is also playing pretty strong as well. And also another thing that's really helping the dollar at least is this statement or announcement that Vladimir Putin made yesterday that he would bring in reservists for the invasion of Ukraine, just because the dollar is sort of considered to be a haven currency in times of geopolitical turmoil and economic stress. So, that's something that we saw on the side as well.
Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City. Thank you, Susan. And we're going to get more on this from Sultan Meghi, the former Chief Innovation Officer and Duke Professor and Scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. now. Well, look, 5 rate hikes already this year from the US Federal Reserve, but we're still seeing inflation stubbornly high. What's your assessment of the Fed's moves so far?
Well, the Federal Reserve has had a tough game laid out in front of it, and by choosing to act in a more subdued way earlier this year and late last year, they're in a position where they've kind of boxed themselves in the corner, and they're going to have to continue to keep raising rates at this kind of level for at least 1 or 2 more cycles. The target rate is probably going to end up being more 4%, 4.25%, 4.5% even. And they're in a tough spot. They're really doubling down on making this as much of a soft landing as they can. But the fact is what they've done to date has only had nominal impacts. We've started to see energy prices come down here in the United States. We're starting to see a bit of a housing correction. But the timeline for really solving this and getting things, quote unquote, back to normal is really looking 12 months out now.
And as you alluded to there, the big fear, I guess, from these aggressive moves that we've seen in the last few meetings could be that the US economy is tipped into recession. Do you think that's where we're heading, or is the US economy already there?
My opinion is that we're already there, and people are arguing over how many recessions can you fit on the head of a pin. It's a semantic question of what the definition is, but the fact is we're starting to see some pretty serious jobs constraints. We're seeing even some of the bigger tech companies like Meta and others starting to contain their workforce. We're seeing housing prices continue to go up, and it's important to remember that if we get inflation under control, it doesn't mean that prices go down. It means that the rate of their increases slows down. And at this point, we're in a situation where wages have not been keeping up with inflation recently, and we're going to be in a situation where that's going to continue to be true for a while. And so regardless of the technical definitions of recession, we're there right now, and we're going to be in this situation for quite a while.
Professor, thank you very much for your time this morning. That was Sultan Meghi joining us live from Washington, D.C. Well, next today, Russia and Ukraine carried out an unexpected prisoner swap, this being the largest swap since the war began in February, involving more than 200 people and 10 foreigners. The released prisoners by Russia included 10 fighters from the United States, Britain, Morocco, Sweden and Croatia. These foreign prisoners were facing death penalties or life terms in Russia. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss thanked the Ukrainian president and Saudi Arabia for helping in the release of the British citizens. Truss further called out Russia, alleging that the country must end the ruthless exploitation of prisoners of war and civilian detainees for political ends. The timing and the magnitude of the swap came as a surprise as Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial troop mobilization. That move has enraged many Russians living in the country. From Moscow to St. Petersburg, there were people out on the streets decrying the war.
I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. The most valuable thing that they can take from us is the lives of our children. I won't give them my child's life.
Well, after the Russian president announced the partial mobilization, the struggle to get a flight ticket out of Russia became more difficult. There are almost no available seats on flights from Moscow to Belgrade or Istanbul until at least next week. Even then, one-way tickets are costing over €2,000. According to Air Serbia's website, the first available flight from Moscow is on October the 9th. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Russian forces fired 9 missiles at the southern city of Zaporizhia, according to the regional governor. He said that at least one person was killed, with others trapped under the rubble. Ukraine's armed forces say Russia, in the last 24 hours, launched 8 missiles and 16 airstrikes and fired 115 anti-aircraft missiles. The targets were mainly military and civilian areas, mostly in Zaporizhia and the Donetsk areas. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday addressed the United Nations General Assembly. Zelensky urged world leaders to unite against Russia's war in Ukraine and strip Moscow of its veto power in the UN Security Council.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations. And Ukraine demands punishment for trying to steal our territory. Punishment for the murders of thousands of people. Punishment for tortures and humiliations of women and men. Punishment for the catastrophic turbulence that Russia provoked with its illegal war, and not only for us, Ukrainians, but for the whole world. For every nation that is represented in this hall of the UN General Assembly.
Across northern and western Europe, vegetable producers are halting their activities due to the financial hit that they've taken from Europe's energy crisis, which is further threatening food supplies across the continent.
Emmanuel Lefebvre has farmed endives in northern France for 32 years. But he says this year there may be little point in continuing. Like other farmers in Europe, he has seen his energy costs soar. What cost him around $120,000 in 2021 has rocketed to almost $1 million, largely due to refrigeration costs.
As it stands, our energy costs will be multiplied by 10 if the price rises continue. It will no longer be bearable in terms of our production. Today we are really in a total impasse, and we really wonder if we will harvest what is in the fields this winter.
And he's not alone. With the European Union highly dependent on Russian gas, energy prices have soared due to sanctions. As a result, vegetable farming has become so expensive in Europe that farmers across the continent are considering halting output. The impact is felt most steeply in more northerly parts of Europe, where greenhouses need to be heated. That means supermarkets could be forced to source more supplies from warmer countries, such as Morocco, Turkey, Tunisia and Egypt. Endives, of which France is the world's biggest producer, are among the most at risk, as they need a lot of electricity all through the production chain. Lefebvre says, in terms of energy consumption, endive producers have no other solutions. The crop accounts for more than 4,000 jobs in northern France. According to Stéphane Jacquet, the incoming president of France's Association of Endive Producers, halting production would have an earthquake impact on employment in the region.
We know very well that we have to save on energy, find new energy sources. They're aware of that. They're ready to play their part, but not by multiplying their bills tenfold. That's inconceivable.
In Australia, over 1,000 people staged a protest against the National Day of Mourning for Queen Elizabeth II. People in Sydney and Melbourne gathered and called for more Indigenous rights. In Sydney, protesters gathered at Sydney Town Hall and marched through the central business district. The protesters denounced the monarchy and the impact of Britain's colonialisation on First Nations people.
The monarchy represents everything that's wrong with the world today. The fact that a group of unelected, born-to-rule people get to live in gold-plated palaces while the rest of us can't even afford heating during the winter. So I think that's why we need to be out here today.
In Melbourne, around 600 protesters marched from Flinders Street Station to the British consulate. The protesters later rubbed red-painted hands on the wall of the consulate.
Every day of our life is mourning. There's not just one day. Jan 26th, that's our major day of mourning. Every day we're fighting, every day we're sorrow, every day we're mourning. So being here today means a lot.
Well, moving on, and on the west coast of the Australian island of Tasmania, about 200 pilot whales have perished after being stranded on the rugged coastline. Emergency workers and locals managed to refloat 32 of the 35 stranded whales as they raced against time to save them.
Oh, it's worked very effectively, our operations today. Of the 35 that were remaining alive this morning, we've managed to refloat, rescue and release the 32 of those animals, and so that's a terrific result. We still have 3 alive on the far northern end of Ocean Beach, but because of access restrictions, predominantly tidal influences, we just haven't been able to access those 3 animals safely today.
An aerial view of the beach showed dozens of glossy black mammals strewn across the beach and stranded on the waterline. Rescuers had to triage the whales to identify those with the best chances of survival. Meanwhile, locals also made an attempt to save the whales by fetching buckets of water and covering the mammals with blankets. Taiwan is aiming to end its mandatory COVID-19 quarantine for arrivals. The island is looking forward to ease other restrictions from next week. The self-governing island has kept some of its entry and quarantine rules in place, even as most of Asia has relaxed or lifted them completely. According to a cabinet spokesman, visa-free entry will resume from October the 13th for citizens from all countries.
If everything stays under control as we expect, we will formally introduce 0+7. That is 0 days of quarantine plus 7 days of self-health management. This will be sometime around October 13. In other words, we can take the second step of opening up borders from the middle of October. This second step includes increasing weekly arrivals to Taiwan to 150,000 and without quarantine on arrival. We have already arrived at the final stretch together. We believe that the pandemic will hopefully be over soon, which is also what all Taiwanese are hoping for.
Since the beginning of the year, Taiwan has reported 6 million domestic cases. Most cases were of the infectious Omicron variant. Before the pandemic, Taiwan was a popular tourist destination with mainly Asian visitors. Well, sports news now, and amid a massive chorus for his ouster, Robert Sarver has announced that he will sell his NBA team Phoenix Suns, as well as his WNBA side, Phoenix Mercury. The move comes 8 days after he was suspended by the NBA over workplace misconduct. The 60-year-old businessman was fined $10 million and handed a one-year ban after an investigation upheld allegations of racism and misogyny during his 18-year regime as the Suns' owner. The report said that the billionaire used the N-word multiple times and made many sexist remarks about the physical appearance of female employees. Los Angeles Lakers star LeBron James was among many who questioned the league's punishment and believe that Sarver got off lightly. And now, after the billionaire's announcement, James has again taken to Twitter and said he is proud to be part of a league committed to progress. Blaming an unforgiving climate, Sarver, in his statement, said, and I quote, "Whatever good I have done or could still do is outweighed by things I have said in the past. For those reasons, I'm beginning the process of seeking buyers for the Suns and Mercury." Sarver bought the teams in July 2004 for about $400 million. With approximately one-third of the stake, he's not the lone owner, but the primary one. Forbes recently estimated the value of the Suns at $1.8 billion. Sarver's case is similar to that of former Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver banned Sterling for life from the league in 2014, effectively forcing the eventual sale of the team after recordings emerged of Sterling using racist language. The US space agency NASA may be able to avert doomsday. Yes, you heard it right. On Monday, NASA will be deliberately making a spacecraft collide with an asteroid to try and change the asteroid's trajectory. If successful, the mission would make deviating killer asteroids away from Earth possible.
We all grew up listening to the stories of dinosaurs' extinction due to devastating asteroid impact. But guess what? If an asteroid comes on Earth's way now, NASA might be able to save the day. NASA's spacecraft named DART is about to zero in on an asteroid millions of kilometers away, with an intent of slamming it head-on at a speed of over 22,000 kilometers per hour. In the first Save the World experiment of its kind, NASA's spacecraft would nudge the asteroid into a slightly tighter orbit around its companion space rock.
Planetary defense is like earth science and space weather. It's one of those domains of science that really can have societal impact. And if you looked at the threats we have each and every day on a daily, per day basis, right now, what happens with our Earth, obviously it's a bigger threat to your and my life. I really love when science can have impact on Earth. And for me, it felt like a gap, right? Kind of an unmet need, kind of an unmet potential for us to really show how our science of asteroids and so forth can really help humans on Earth.
If successful, the $325 million mission will demonstrate that if a killer asteroid ever heads our way, we will stand a fighting chance. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Well, as we come to the end of our bulletin, we leave you with these dramatic visuals from the US state of Ohio, where Officer Stacey Wright was attacked by a suspect that she'd pulled over for speeding. But Good Samaritans of Wilbury City stepped in to help her. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. We leave you with these visuals. Thanks for watching.
Moxrow will be close behind. This is why I'm stopping you to speed. 57 and a 35. It's me able to step out of the vehicle. Have a seat.
I'm not sitting. I'm not sitting!
Back up! Back up!
I'm not sitting!
Radio, send me units. Roll over on your stomach, now!
Knock it off, man. Knock it off now. Get your arm behind you. There are many other... This is Arab.